When a regional bank, like Bank of Hawaii, and I have one cross something bank here, when they go out, that means the company can't make payroll and things like this?
Absolutely. Your business accounts are treated no differently than your personal accounts. The regional banks represent 70% of all the small business loans in the United States. And for years, forever, small businesses in this country represented over 40% of the GDP of the United States. So realizing that these banks, in their hands, hold the majority of all the small businesses in this country, it's a very frightening thing if you own a small business and have your money in what amounts to any bank other than a commercial bank. And really a lot of people do, because these are the banks, and we've talked about this before, you talk about the small banks that are in your neighborhood, real close to the places you frequent. Well, the places you frequent, they go in and they have relationships with these small banks. These small banks make loans to small businessmen and women based less upon balance sheet and business plan and more upon relationships. And that's what these small banks really are all about, relationships, and how that has helped foster the small businesses in this country.
First of all, there's roughly 5,000 of these regional banks, and these banks, Robert, are responsible for roughly 70% of all the small business loans in the United States. And the small businesses have traditionally represented anywhere near 40% of GDP in this country. They are the backbone. These are the banks where you walk in and they say, "Hi, Robert, how's your family? How's your dad? How's your mom? How are your kids?" They make loans based upon relationships, not upon balance sheets and business plans. They are more of a piece of the community for all of middle America. And the majority of all the small businesses in this country have relied upon these banks because of a relationship. And where a business plan and a balance sheet may not stack up so well with one of the big 5 or 6 commercial banks, it works with the small regional banks.
So they're just these behemoth banks that have created balance sheets that are so intertwined with one another systemically that if they fail, it would have ramifications for the entire global financial system. These large, too big to fail commercial banks are more or less being backstopped and guaranteed by the Federal Reserve. Well, the rest of the banks, as we were told by Janet Yellen, if they're not too systemically large, as the majority of them are not, they won't be bailed out. They'll be bailed in, where the depositors are general creditors of the bank, and the money that you deposit really belongs to the bank and not to you. You are a creditor of the bank. And if they go under, instead of being bailed out the way that Silicon Valley Bank was, because many politicians had their money there and the big startup money for Silicon Valley, whatever the reason they bailed it out, it shouldn't have been bailed out according to the new laws. But these other banks, if they go under, you will be bailed in.
The U.S. has been holding most of the world's gold because at the end of World War II, we told the governments of the world, "Hey, we'll hold your gold and we will guarantee that we will pay you $35 an ounce for it whenever you want." Right. So what a lot of these countries did is they would give us their gold, but we would pay them $35 an ounce. They would take the proceeds and put it into treasuries. And those treasuries would yield a return on a non-interest bearing asset. And heck, they could always return it for $35 an ounce anyway. That was until 1971.
So what that means, if you're living in Podunk, wherever you are, and you have $500,000, your business is attached to the bank. You know, your payroll's in there, you have employees, you have their savings and all this, and you have $500,000 in cash in there. If Bank XYZ, regional bank, crashes, what happens to your $500,000?
Well, we're supposedly told that $250,000 of it is covered by FDIC, which certainly is something I want to talk about. But the other $250,000 would go into the kitty. So in theory, you get your $250,000 insured by FDIC. The other $250,000 then goes into, in essence, bankruptcy proceeding where it is used to bail in the inequities of the bank. Hopefully there's something left over, and anything that is left over goes out in a pro rata fashion to all of the people who then bailed in the bank.
So all I can simply say to you is this: the banks are in trouble. We're going to increase the tremendous amount of inflation that's already into the system. We're going to increase it to bail out those banks that are systemically too big to fail. And they've already told us it won't be via taxpayer injections or bailouts. They've told us that FDIC only has 0.03% backing, so that won't work. So they'll print money to bail those banks out. But everyone's going to flood into the commercial banks, and then they are ripe for whatever they have in mind. If they let one of them fail, just one, everyone will panic and embrace the new CBDC currency, which we have been told by the Bank of International Settlements that everyone must have. All countries that are part of that network, the BIS network, has to have an operational CBDC by 2025. Who knows? Maybe we'll have one much sooner than that, the way that this is all going, but this is very frightening. It's one thing to speak of problems in the stock and the bond market and the real estate market. It's another thing to talk about 5,000 banks, regional banks, which represent 70% of all the small business loans in this country, and small businesses representing 40% of GDP forever. It's one thing for that to happen, and another thing for these banks to be on the chopping block, a fuse to be lit underneath the safety of what we consider to be non-speculative. To put our money in the bank is what we've been taught to do since we were little kids with a piggy bank. Put it in there, it's safe, and it's not speculating, it's not investing, it's safe. And now all of a sudden that whole thing is thrown upside down and being forced into a small group of very large banks, the big commercial banks like JP and Morgan Stanley and Citi. And this is a very big problem, especially in the light of the central bank digital currency. And we've talked about Lael Brainerd before, and Lael Brainerd, who is the architect in many respects of this whole ideology, a modern monetary theorist whose main premise is the abolishment of the commercial banking system. Well, you throw everyone into the commercial banks and get rid of the 5,000 regional banks, and now you have everyone in a mousetrap. And if you decide to roll out a central bank digital currency, and worse yet, if these commercial banks fail and everyone is inside the system, you come in and you issue a new central bank digital currency to the rescue. Now, I'm not saying that this is what the plan is, but Lael Brainerd first was at the Treasury.